Okay, guys, I think we're going to make a start. So welcome everybody to our cover crops workshop. So the purpose of this workshop is you would have seen during the symposium, there's a fair amount of people that are working on cover crops, and we're doing a lot of cover crop work in terms of nematodes. And the agronomists have their perspective, and the nematologists have their perspective, and the farmer's somewhere in between. He's not quite sure who to listen to. So the idea of this is to make it a fairly interactive discussion type workshop where we listen to each person's perspective, and then we discuss what is the way forward in terms of cover crops. But the idea is for this to be specifically focused towards nematodes and its use in nematode management, be it from a good or bad perspective. So the format of the workshop is we're going to have 3 speakers. The first is an agronomist, the second is a nematologist, and the third is a farmer. So I think that's quite a nice perspective on things. And then we'll have them one after the other. We won't have questions after each talk, and then afterwards we'll open up the floor for questions and discussions. So Lene, the guys online, can somebody just give me a thumbs up to say that you can hear us before we start? Okay, so the guys online can hear us. So I'm going to invite as our first speaker Hendrik Smith, who is our specialist in conservation agriculture, and he's a researcher at Asset Research, and we've invited him to give us an agronomist perspective on cover crops.
Thank you very much for the introduction and the opportunity to speak to you today about this important subject. I think I'm going to stand here. Sounds okay? Looks okay? Yeah. So my topic is regenerative conservation agriculture and the integration of cover crops. And I just thought this will give you a nice perspective to see where everything fits in, where cover crops fits in, and just give you like I say, a broad perspective to understand, specifically from my perspective, where I work mostly in the grain, crop livestock, grain industry. So what I will be speaking about, why do we even have this conversation today? And then what do we do now? What is our guiding star and good principles? And then I just want to show how it really works in practice. Just a couple of examples, just to show you. Because in this time frame, we cannot really go into much detail. So why? Why do we have this discussion on cover crops, conservation agriculture, regenerative agriculture? Why don't we leave the existing model going as it is? Because it goes quite well. It's like a oiled machine. It's like a boat, big ship going down the Suez Canal. Why do we have to turn it around? So, because we face and cause existential problems as agriculture. And if we don't find solutions quite soon and implement it quite soon, we are in deep trouble. So that's the bottom line, the core motivation. Why we have this discussion right now. Okay, I just want to show you a couple of facts. Why I say so. We have these problems. We have lost about 50% of our soil organic carbon in South Africa. So we actually sit on degraded soils. We try to farm sustainably on degraded soils. We lose about 2 to 3 tons of topsoil for every ton of maize we produce in South Africa. So that's also not sustainable, just from water erosion. In the most western parts, but also other parts of the country, even in the Western Cape, we have wind erosion, where we have bare soil, we have soil loss from wind, warmer landscapes, and decreasing chances of precipitation. So there's desertification going on there, starting there. And then we lose biodiversity because of cropland expansion, unsustainable land management, and climate change. And then we have climate change. So these are some of the major problems, existential problems that we face and contribute to. And we have a chance now to make a difference. We have a small window open to make a difference, to start something, to turn this ship around. But not much time is left. So that's why we say, have these discussions, see how we can formulate new designs, how can we implement it, understand it better. But there are solutions in agriculture to turn this ship around. So what we say is we need to move closer to nature. We need to understand nature and try to mimic it in our agricultural design and implementation. So that picture on your left-hand side is supposed to be a snapshot of nature or ecology. I'm sure you can see nematodes there if you look carefully, but it's not all about nematodes. It's about nature. And if you study nature, and I think we've done quite well to study nature, both from natural science or just observation as a farmer, just observing what's going on there will also help you to move forward. So what do we see? Yes, we see healthy populations of nematodes, but we also see living ecosystem driven by photosynthesis. We see an interconnected and interdependent above and below ground system, closed and stable cycles, functioning food webs and processes, natural, free services like water, nutrients, pests and disease control. So ecosystem health, like the foundation of a pyramid, is the foundation of any agricultural business and drives both productivity and profitability. So that's what we are trying to do. So what is nature in? What is a natural ecosystem in, let's say, South Africa? How did nature look like 400 years ago in most of our veld areas where we have agriculture at this stage? Didn't it more or less look like this? Huge herds of trakbok moving over the landscapes, having a profound impact on the landscapes, on the vegetation, on the soils. That's how our natural landscapes, specifically soil and vegetation, evolved over millions of years. How do we mimic that in what we are trying to do in agriculture? So remember I said nature is our guiding star. And what are the principles that we can glean from that? Well, the first one is that soil is the heart of the system. If we look after our soil or our land, we can also look after our ecosystem, it will look after you. That's one of the guarantees we have in life. In terms of soil health, we look at it where we work and stand as from a holistic point of view. We say, right, let's try to see if this soil is working, if this soil is healthy. And we look at proxy indicators, not sometimes specific indicators, but we mostly look at proxy indicators like soil organic matter, soil respiration, active carbon, etc. So to see if that soil is healthy as a whole. Because we also want to see if the soil is healthy, that the soil microbiome, in other words, is in balance. The good guys and the bad guys and the ugly guys are in a healthy relationship where they cancel each other out. And the good guys are actually doing their job, what they're supposed to do. We also believe that the process and the products of photosynthesis released by the roots is really important, feeding the soil health. So we fancy and see that the presence of roots is really important in our system, what we are trying to do, living roots. We also believe in diversity because we can see in a lot of research that the result of diversity is multiplied, is synergism. 1.1 plus 1 is not 2, it's 3. So we want to move to more diverse systems. So what we've understand is that, yes, soil is important, ecosystems, nature is important, moving in that direction, but we also understood that we need to understand soils much better and how to put that life back into the soil. and to restore, to regenerate our soil systems? Well, the first point is that we need to recognize that soil is a living ecosystem. It's not a dead planting medium or growing medium. And then what are the principles, again, going back to my question, what driving soil health? So these are the simple principles that we gleaned from nature, that we use to design our conservation or regenerative agricultural systems. The first one is minimize soil disturbance, and I'm just going to flash it. I'm not going into any detail here because of time. The second one is keep the soil covered, because we need that cover to restore and protect the soil and the water cycle. If we don't have that, the soil will run off with the soil, the water will run off with the soil. It doesn't infiltrate, and it actually, you lose a lot of productivity and efficiency in that manner. The other principle is maximize crop and plant diversity through crop rotations, associations, and sequences. And remember, one of our ideas here is to maximize photosynthetic capacity, because we want, in other words, we want to have that leaf plant cover as long as possible, producing the photosynthesis process, releasing the food into the soil with a diverse range of roots, feeding the soil process, the soil biology, the soil food web, making it strong again. And one of the tools that we use here in diverse cropping system is multi-species cover crop mixtures in summer and winter. And there you can see an example of one of these systems, and that's what we are going to talk about. The other principle is the integration of animals, because nature, as you know, bottom left-hand picture, our nature works with animals. Lots of different species, the more the better. To have that impact, that final impact with the dung, the urine, and the trampling effect of the hooves of the animals on the soils, having a profound impact on the health of the soil and the ecosystem. So we also realize that if we don't apply all the principles with quality for a long enough period, then we don't have the desired effect on the soil health. Like you can see there, an example of Guy Brown, one of the gurus, regenerative agriculture gurus in the world. He started off with no-till, then crop rotations, simple single species cover crops, and he didn't have much of an impact on the soil health. But when he moved over to multi-species cover crops, livestock integration, the reduction of external input, his soil health and carbon just flew out of the roof up into the sky. So the sky is our limit here. Just quickly want to share some of the insights we got from our cover crop research in South Africa for the last 10 years. And our focus was basically to increase our knowledge and management of conservation agriculture tools, such as biodiversity, intensification, integration of livestock, and the grazing systems. What kind of grazing systems are the best to use on cover crop in crop rotations? And some of the key findings, I will just quickly run through them. We found that there's a huge improvement in soil health, an increase in amount and quality of soil cover, significant and improvements in cash crop yield during drought seasons after the cover crops, and then a reduction in agrochemical use, especially fertilizer without yield penalties, increased biodiversity, weight gain from the animals integrated, reduced risk by diverse income generation, and improved financial viability. So those are some of the key findings that we got in the last 10 years from our cover crop research. The most important one that we found is, and that's the question, first question that farmers ask you, is what is the profitability? And we found that cover crops allow the profitable and sustainable integration of animals in crop livestock systems, if you do it correctly. If you just bring in cover crops, it's much less of a chance of of profitability. But if you bring in a livestock on the cover crops, your profitability raises. I just want to show you a couple of examples, because you might have the question. I know many of you have worked with cover crop systems, but here are a couple of examples from my experience. So we identified the best conservation agriculture systems to include in our trials, comparing it with simple no-till, just a simple rotation, maize, soya, for example, and then conventional tillage. So this is one example. There's many permutations, as you might see. So you start the first season with an intercrop, let's say a cash crop like maize, intercropping with multi-species cover crops. The second season, you will have a double cover crop multi-species system. In other words, you start with a summer cover crop, multi-species, followed by winter cover crop multi-species, but also heavily grazed or correctly grazed in the summer and the winter. And then you follow that up in the next season with another cash crop also integrated with cover crops. Obviously, those winter cover crops are also grazed. So you have diversity, you have cover, you have livestock integration. All the principles are applied with quality in this respect. Just a slightly different example, more to the western areas. And in the last season, you can see the soybean is replaced by sunflower with an intercrop. So this is a typical example of a best crop livestock conservation agriculture system, heavily integrated with cover crops and livestock. We also introduce cover crops with smallholder systems, if there are trials there, and you can see the various different options from intercropping to strip cropping, etc., that we bring in cover crops into smallholders. Just an example of the summer cover crop and winter cover crop mixtures. We always try to bring in grasses, legumes, as well as brassicas. So the first summer cover crop mix, the SCC, you can see babala. I'm not going to stand still. I just want to show you examples. Obviously, there's so many different ways you can do this. There's babala, there's hybrid babala, cowpea, sun-hemp, tillage radish. So you can see the different plant groups, different species. The winter cover crop mix, rye, triticale, grazing vets, canola, fodder turnips. Another example of the same thing, you can see there's more species. You can go up depending on what you wanted to achieve, what your budget is, your context. You can see different species, different ratios of the summer crop as well as the winter cover crop systems. Here is two examples of intercropping mixtures. You see the first one is an intercropping mixture with maize, oats, veg, turnip, babala. The second one is with sunflower on the Springbok Flats. You see stooling rye, wheat, buckwheat, facelia, tiller radish, turnip, and cowpeas. And here is a mixture that we work together with Badenbrug to introduce in sunflower systems in the northwest. And here we have oats, stooling rye, cowpea, radish, buckwheat, coriander, flaxseed, veg as part of a mix with sunflower in the northwest province. So this is just a photo of one of our trials at Ottosdal this season. It was a very dry season at Ottosdal, but we still managed to establish the intercrop in the sunflowers, yielding 2.6 tons, which is quite good. And we also found that the yields of the sunflowers, where the intercrop is higher than normal soil crop sunflower, which is also interesting. Obviously, you need to have the right implements to do intercropping. That is another major challenge that we have for row crops. How and when do we come into the row crops to plant intercrops is a challenge. There's various options, but that also depends on the context, what the farmer can access. Application of CA RA principles in orchards, that's also definitely not my cup of tea, but I know there's many people like Simon and so on that sit here that have a lot of experience in introducing cover crops with orchards. This is just an example of Bert Kutje. I know many of you know him or work with him. And he brings in cover crops into all his systems, as well as livestock. A diverse mix of cover crops and animals into his orchards, vineyards, cash crops, etc. And there's just a couple of pictures of where and how he brings in these two elements. You can see the pigs and sometimes sheep also grazing in his export vineyards, doing their job. This is just an example of a peckernut and livestock integration just north of Pretoria, where they plant cover crops without any chemicals in between the peckernuts and graze them with pigs and chickens afterwards. And this is the information I got from Simon Hodgins from AGT Cover Crops. I'm glad that Simon is here so he can talk about it himself. But I found it quite fascinating, the information that he gave me about their work and cover crop integration with permanent crops like citrus and all the others. But Simon, you are welcome to talk about this later on. We're going to have an open discussion, so I would rather leave this to you, but I just want to say a few things. I found it very interesting that the citrus industry is way behind the rest of the permanent planting industries. There is massive resistance to change there, and we can talk about that and how to overcome that. Everyone else is looking at orchard floor, plantation floor management by specific cover or utility crops as standard practice. Mixes are based on what is commercially available and do not only consider the microbiome underground. So there's really interesting stories going on there, also still some challenges to overcome, obviously. This is also information from, and the top photo from Simon, is their approach, AGT's approach for the subtropical and tropical permanent plantings. I'm sure there's other cover crop companies here who's also doing great work in this context. But for the sake of time and for Simon to allow Simon to talk about this a bit later, I'll leave this to him. So there you can see the bottom picture is it's another farmer in a Boshoff area that plants cover crops in between his peckernut trees, and he utilized them at that stage with chicken or egg mobiles and traveling that egg mobile up and down the orchard. So this is just also AGT's approach specifically to target nematodes, and there's a really interesting work that they are doing, and Simon is there to talk to us, and you can go and approach him to talk about this. But there's different combinations, mixtures on the specific conditions that they can use to target nematodes. And the other speakers will obviously also talk about that. My second last slide, just an example of a permanent perennial mixed pasture in the Highveld. And there you can see Hans van Rooyen on the left-hand side. He's one of the gurus. He's a farmer, but he worked in the seed industry for decades. And he likes his mixtures. You can see there's an 18 species mixtures that he established. He said, it looks okay, but the Assagai clover is a bit dominating, as you can see there. Just an example how diverse a permanent mixture can be. The other two, alternative 1 and 2, is just a smaller or a shorter mixture with Rhodes grass, chicory, plantain, sweet clover, and lucerne. And the second one is Sericea, Lespedisia, or Poorman's lucerne, with Smith's finger and chicory. And I mean, you can look at the list on your left hand and to see the wide range of options available. Obviously, the species that you use for your purpose is important. The different ratios that we use, all those things are important. You've got to sit with your expert, your seed company, and look at your specific context your purpose and design a system that will meet your needs. That is really important, and that's part of my conclusion, is to say that cover crop applications are highly context specific. So it depends on your purpose, your natural resources, your financials, your implements, etc. And around those, you've got to sit with your cover crop expert and design your system and adaptively manage it, adjust it when necessary. And we also need to develop, in other words, a mixture for every context. It's context-specific design of these systems. Cover crops can solve many of those problems that we face and provide sustainable solutions and increase the profitability if we do it correctly. And livestock integration is made possible in a sustainable and profitable manner, also addressing the soil health much better in that way. But last message, it's important to apply all the principles of regenerative or conservation agriculture practices with quality. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hendrik. I think we're now going to invite Gerard Dupree, who is no stranger to this audience, who's going to tell us a little bit more about cover crops, a nematologist's perspective.
Hi, everyone. Okay, thanks, Prabhashini. Thanks, Mika, and everyone for organizing this. I'm going to give them a few seconds just to load the presentation. So while they're doing it, I'll share a little bit more context of how I'm involved and our team, how we're doing and working on cover crops. So as part of the message or the talk that I gave you yesterday, in that journey and that story, I met Hendrik, and then we became partners in a sense, working a lot of projects focusing on regenerative agriculture, conservation agriculture, and of course a big part of that is cover cropping. Although I'm not a cover crop expert myself, again, it's something that's part in the systems that we study. So I'm going to give them, let me just check with them real quick. Good, there we go. Okay, so the picture that you see on my title slide is actually taken on McCain's farm just 2 weeks ago. We're working there with Mika in a project, Farm for the Future, where McCain is implementing regenerative agriculture to farm more sustainably, but also to deal with nematodes. But I'm going to leave that for Peter because he's going to follow me and he's going to talk more about that. All right, so this is the big, I think, conundrum. One of the big questions that we currently have is, we know that cover crops have multiple benefits, and I'll mention them a little bit later. But we also know that there's potential risk in terms of their host plant status. And this is something that we need to consider as scientists, but also as the industry, in terms of how we tackle this problem, how we address it, how do we share this information with producers, and how do we make the best of the situation. So something I wanted to do, because I was quite surprised to learn of how many people are working on cover crops, which of course is a good thing. But I mean, I know of Mika, and because some of the results that I'm going to present is actually from Mika and Renus' trial. I know of Prof. Tricky, who works on cover crops. So who else, in terms of research projects, have actually done and completed project or currently busy with cover crop research? Okay, so Annika is there. Annika, can you in one sentence just say exactly, like summarize what you guys are focusing on? And that's for promoting soil health, or? Okay, so that's good to know. And Sheila?
Yeah, we did the Hortgrow orchard floor management for 3 years. It's been suspended now, and it'll probably start up again in 2 years' time. And I'm involved with Matthew Addison in that one. And I'm also involved wine tech, but I think Annika, I'm working sort of with Annika in that one.
Okay.
Yeah, there are quite a few groups in the Western Cape. We quite and Taybrook, wine grape guys as well that we work with privately. I think Johan, he's not here now. One of him and Peter Swanepoel have also got a student with one of our producers.
Okay.
And then we've got a lot of
is that soil health or nematodes as well? or both?
It's both. It's just the holistic, and then we concentrate on the nematode very often.
Okay.
And we do a lot of private clients.
Is that host plant status as well?
No, very
Okay.
few there. Renus does all
Renus
of that
does
for
that.
us, yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I'm mostly involved with screening cover crops for host status for nematodes, and also with my student Louis in cover crops that are specifically antagonistic against nematodes, that have a specific influence on nematode numbers now.
Okay. So that's really good. Anyone else before I continue here in the front, Mika? So while the mic is heading that way, the reason why I asked is, and I wasn't sure how much focus there is on the beneficial side, or let's say promoting soil health. I know we do it in our trials, but it's good to know that it's a real research effort in that side as well.
Yeah, we're looking at it from applications from a practical side of things for farmers, where it's got to be cost effective, it's got to hit their targets. The species available have to be available commercially, that they can be planted properly, and yeah, just making sure that there is an actual commercial application to the science work that is being done. Because if there isn't, we've done a 2-year interplanting study through Tufts University, again, just commercial companies sponsoring master's students and various things like that, mainly aimed at soil health, and the whole commercial side of things, interplanting, looking at profitability, kgs of beef on the intercrops, soil health, etc.
Okay. Good. So that's really good news. And then, like I said, the flip side of the coin, or the double-edged sword, the photo on the right is actually a cover crop. So that's cowpea. It's used as in a cover crop mixture. And Ricky took that photo as part of the trials they're running. So that's the other side of the story that we need to discuss as well. Right, so building on what Hendrik did very well as a foundation is that we have different functional groups or classes of cover crops. And I guess it's a bit of a debate, but it also depends really on the agricultural context. Are you planting a single cover crop for a specific purpose? Or are you planting a mixture, for general soil health promotion? And is it necessarily required to plant 15 or 20 species? Are you just going for diversity, or are you going to be very selective in terms of what species you select and from which functional groups? So you can see there are actually different benefits from the functional groups. I'm not going to spend much time on this, but I think this is, and we'll talk about this later, this is an important consideration. All right, so when you consider the ecological benefits, so now I'm first referring to the more general ecosystem benefits, and then I'll focus or narrow it down a bit more to the nematodes. So building healthy soil, like we just said, this is kind of the thing that we're really trying to do in conservation, regenerative agriculture, and also other systems. It's really got to do with creating an environment that's conducive to building a healthy and functioning ecosystem. We spoke about this yesterday morning as well. So habitat and food, that's what organisms need to survive. And if we have, the general idea is that the more diverse we are in terms of our agricultural systems, the more we provide habitat and food for different beneficial organisms that can inhabit that soil and perform a specific function. So in general, as I said, promote diversity. The reason why I want to add this is because, and other people can speak to this as well, a lot of farmers, for example, start planting pollinator strips to attract beneficial insects as well to their farmers. So it's not just about what's going on below ground, but of course also above ground. Sustain ecosystem functioning, again, linking to building healthy soil. The main ecosystem functions: nutrient cycling, disease pest suppression or regulation, water purification, and carbon regulation. So those are the 4 main functions, and we know that for a soil to be healthy, and ultimately deliver benefits to producers, we need a system that's well balanced and functioning on all 4 of those fronts. And then to regulate biological communities, and I don't just mean pest and disease, I mean the regulation of the entire ecosystem, which ultimately then allows it to function properly. All right, so that's very broadly, but like I mentioned, from a wider ecosystem perspective. So when you're thinking about nematodes, what I did is to look at literature to see what's available. So I've made a few points here, and it's just the main highlights. So there's, of course, a lot more info out there. Interestingly enough, well, maybe not interesting, but certainly, I guess, good to know as well, is that in general, so this is, I will say this is generalization because of course you'll find differences in different studies, that colonizers, so your CP1 nematodes, that typically rapidly, build populations whenever there's a change in the environment, they are the ones to respond actually fairly quickly to the introduction of cover crops. It makes sense because cover crops, especially if you have a diversity of them, they pump out root exudates into the soil. That is a food source for the soil ecosystem, and then they respond as the CP1 nematodes. Omnivore predators, this was a quite interesting finding, well, I would say a very positive one as well. One study reported an 80% increase in your omnivores and predators. So as you know, omnivores and predators are typically the more sensitive nematodes. So having them there indicates that your system is improving in terms of a soil ecosystem health perspective, but also more specifically that your omnivores and predators are able to regulate your pests and diseases. Okay, so the other truth as well is that plant-parasitic nematodes also increase in certain instances or circumstances. And this is, of course, an important consideration, but I want to add to that, this paper found that if you have sufficient plant diversity, that in fact creates competition between plant-parasitic nematodes. And as a result, even though you have higher plant-parasitic nematodes in total, you are kind of regulating the numbers per plant-parasitic group, and for that reason, limiting the effect or the damage. Okay, like I said, I'm not saying this is in general in terms of it's applicable in all situations. This was some of the key findings from literature that I found quite interesting. So before I get any questions, I just want to add the two photos of the nematodes that I have from the presentation. They're not related to soil, but I thought it's pretty cool to include. It's actually from compost, so it does link to what we're doing because it's working on a project where farmers are actually adding compost to soils to help boost the ecosystem. So the nematode on the left has been in a mati day. It's a lifer for me. I've never seen it before in my life apart from actually on a microscope slide in Wageningen. And the one on the right, I mean, if you can guess that nematode, I mean, you're certainly 1 in a million, but it's probably from the genus Myolimus. I don't even know if it's found in South Africa. I actually don't know if there's a report. Chantal, maybe not. Don't think so. Anyway, so I actually asked the help of Facebook to help me identify that one. And when I checked the key, they were pretty accurate. So yeah. All right, so now let's get to the flip side of the coin, and that's host plant status. So, what is the ability or the role of cover crops in hosting plant-parasitic nematodes and then either downregulating or upregulating those populations. So the truth is that information is available on this, but it's very limited in South Africa. And in fact, the information that I found is really, people that worked in this room actually on this. So there's probably more out there, but a lot of the host plant status screenings done by Rinus, by Mika, and so forth. Okay, minimal info on mixed cover crop or cover crops. So what I mean is that is usually screenings are done on single cover crops, but we're not at this point yet testing what happens when you have multiple species planted either in a greenhouse trial or then in the field. So that's something we definitely need to consider. Context specific, I'm not going to say too much about this. Hendrik already mentioned this. Your context, your agricultural context really has a big role in what cover crops you select and for what reason you plant them and use them. This is a point that I think is important, and I'm definitely not trying to blame anyone. I'm just saying this is something that's happening in the industry, is that cover crops, if we're dealing, for example, with nematode pests, are sold as suppressors in the sense that, a cover crop is sold with the ability that is able to suppress root knot nematodes. But what we don't tell the producers or the farmers is that some species are actually very good hosts of plant-parasitic nematodes. So that part of the information is missing, and it's probably because it's not really available yet. Okay, so it's something we need to work on as well. Okay, limited producer awareness, again linking to host plant status. That's something that I will keep on advocating for. And then I do think it's the responsibility of academia and seed companies to communicate that information, playing open cards with the producer. So if the producer does have a nematode problem, we need to be very mindful of what cover crops we do put in there. And I'll substantiate that with these findings. So this is from the work of Mika and Rinus. Was Tricky involved, Mika? Okay, so Tricky as well then. This is from 2002. This was published in CHIPS. Is there another one coming? an updated one for this? I think so, in 2023, I believe. So there will be a newer version. So specifically, they did the screenings on the leisure nematodes. This is some of the common winter cover crop species out there. What I want to, so I mean, we can share this information afterwards, so I'm not going to run through each one of them. But what I think is actually quite important, and what I wanted to highlight after studying this, this graph or this table, is that for a single cover crop, there's different host plant statuses depending on the nematode species. Okay, so that immediately complicates it in my mind, because you think, you know you've got Pratylenchus, you don't know what species per se, and that already has an influence on the selection of your cover crop and specifically your cultivar as well. So that's one point that I think is important to highlight. The second one is, and I'll use white mustard as an example here, you can see that it has poor, moderate, and good. So that's the PMG, poor, moderate, and good host plant status. But that's the cultivar Cyto, so, or Cito, white mustard. And then also for winter cover crops, we've got another cultivar, Iris, also white mustard, all three species being poor host, having poor host plant status. So not just between, so what I'm saying is the consideration is not just between what nematode species we have, but also selecting the cultivar of, or the variety of that cover crop as an important consideration. So here are also a list of summer cover crops. Again, it's in this article, so I'm going to leave you to go find this online and wait for the 2023 version that Mika will publish. And then there's, so the difference between the two slides, these are generally good host or moderate hosts, and then most of these are poorer hosts of leisure nematodes. Okay, as a summary slide in terms of host plant status, this is sort of from the work from, again, Mika, Rinus, and Ricky showing a bit of a summary of what summer and winter cover crops are really known to be poor hosts of both root knot and leisure nematodes. So at this point, I'm not sure if there's work being done on root knot. It should be done probably at some point, so it is going to be done at some point. So this is the summary information that we have at this point in terms of screenings that were done in South Africa. So if there's any information that can be added to this, we can discuss that during the panel. Okay, then my take-home message. Okay, so again, agricultural context is really important. Your goal, having your goal in mind, and what is your goal, knowing what your goal is really important. Is it to build soil health in general, or is it to control a specific nematode that's causing a lot of issues for you? So knowing what the goal is. Your cover crop mixture composition, I'm sure the seed companies will be able to confirm this and actually speak a lot about this, is you need to select a mixture that's, I'm going to say, purpose-built or purpose-mixed for what your goals are. And then there's no one-size-fits-all. And I believe that to be true for agriculture in general, especially when we think about regenerative or conservation agriculture, but then for cover crops as well, in the sense that there can be differences between cultivars in terms of the host plant status, and also that nematode species can vary in terms of the host plant status within a single cultivar. And then I think it's really important, of course, that we need to promote research in this field. We need to do more screenings. We need to get funding to do all of this. And then we need to promote awareness among producers that this is really a relevant topic. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much, Gerard. Our final speaker for this afternoon is Peter Hollebrandse, and he is the manager at the McCain Foods Farm of the Future Africa. So I'm quite excited to hear this, Peter, because it's really nice, I think, as researchers to see some of the stuff that we do being implemented in the field and to hear what you have to say. So thank you.
Okay, yeah, thanks for the invitation. And I see they're still loading the presentation. So just a little bit background on McCain Foods. McCain Foods is a global company that processes mainly potatoes. We do a little bit of vegetables as well in South Africa and in New Zealand. So the thing is then, okay, why are they farming? I mean, in certain regions, although we are a processing company in certain regions, South Africa, Argentina, Colombia, we have Canada as well, we have some of our own farms. But mainly we deal with potato producers that produce potatoes for us on contract. So McCain realized after a couple of years ago that we have to do something about regenerative agriculture. Not so much just because of regenerative agriculture, because everybody jumps that thing, but we realize if we're not changing the way we produce food, we're gonna run out of inputs. Fertilizer is ending, fossil fuels is ending, our production costs are getting more expensive because poorer soil qualities. So that's how they came up with a project called Farms of the Future. I'm just trying to find this thing. So Farms of the Future, it's 3 commercial scale farms around the world where we're gonna promote regenerative agricultural practices combined with state-of-the-art technology to create a sustainable, cost-effective farming model around potatoes, so that we can showcase to our growers, okay, we want you to be more, in line with farm in line with nature, but we also have solutions for you. So the first one was started in 2021 in Canada, where McCain originated from. The second one we started this year in South Africa. And then we're looking for a third location to start in the next couple of years. And we support it within the farming with the intensive agronomy program to record what we're actually doing. I mean, it's nice to do it, but we also want to be able to present it to growers and have facts with it. And that's Lesego Matlalas, he's also in the room here. He's the agronomist on our farm in South Africa. The farm itself is located in Lichtenburg. We farm about over 500 hectares of crops. It's potatoes is our main crop, of course. Then we have rotation crops, maize, soybeans, and wheat. And cover crops and green manure are strategically integrated in the cropping system. Then just one question, or like a thought: when do you call it a cover crop? When do you call it a green manure? Because people talk about cover crops, but they also talk about green manure. So what is the difference between the one and the other one? I'm also not exactly sure. Then also animal production will be integrated in the system to graze our winter cover crops. And I think the previous speakers, they already said enough about why do we want to get cover crops introduced, and also the introduction of animal production. So a typical rotation in the area where we are is wheat. Then in December they burn all the stubble, and then they quickly plant sugar beans after it. During the winter, cattle will just roam on the remaining residue, plant maize. Same thing afterwards, another year of maize. And then normally every 4th year we plant potatoes. Then the main problems we sit with is root knot nematodes, Melodogeny, Incognita and Javanica. Why are we so sure about it? Because in potatoes it's a very clear problem. If you have it in potatoes, we've had fields that at the end of the year, we couldn't process them because they were full of nematodes. So that's why we're pretty sure we have that problem. I think we also have some Pratylenchus problems, but they're not so clear. And yeah, you have to kind of study, do more in-depth study to see what is the problem. Then other problem is we have a very high weed pressure. Yellow nutsheds, it's also a big problem in potatoes if you don't control it properly. It can be chemically controlled, but in the end we want to reduce all our chemical inputs. In general, farmers don't really take specific actions to control these problems. Then if you look in this rotation from a regenerative perspective, I mean, at least 16 months out of the 4 years you have no living roots in the ground. And we actually want to improve our soil health and soil activity. So we need more roots in the ground for a longer period. So then after a while we start thinking, okay, how are we? What can we do to improve this? So we came up with a regenerative rotation. What we do now, we grow wheat. Instead of burning after the wheat, we follow with a cover crop. So we're thinking of planting buckwheat in December because they say it's a very short grower, but it has a question mark because the idea only came up a couple of months ago when we saw we actually still had a gap between the wheat and the nematode suppressing fodder radish. So the big thing is the fodder radish is there to suppress the root knot nematodes, which is one of our biggest problems. That's actually the first time when we started with cover crops or green manure was with that crop. So it's specifically not biofumigation, so we don't plow it into the ground to create that gas. The mode of action is actually the roots attract the nematodes, but they can't multiply. So if you grow it for about 3 months, we hope as many eggs have hatched and no new ones are left in the ground. So that's one thing. Then we come with winter cover crops, which is mainly mixes. We're not looking so specifically to reduce actively nematodes, but we hope by the increased soil activity that the good ones keep the bad ones in balance. That's our idea. And then we want to go to no-till because one of the things it's cost. It reduces our input cost, and also less tillage should improve your soil health. Also, due to no-till, we don't have to cut at the wheat straw anymore because we plant straight through it. Okay, this is a picture of the fodder radish we're growing. So specifically grown to reduce the root knot nematodes, not so much a mix, but just a specific species to reduce the nematodes. And the purpose is to completely replace nematodes when we're growing potatoes. We've done this for a couple of years now, and I'm convinced now that we can do it. Last year we did half of a 40-hectare fields. We grew the whole 40 hectares with the fodder radish. The one half we put our nematicide plan on it, so pre-planting during the season. The other half we didn't do anything, no artificial nematicides. The yields and the quality was the same on both sides. So that was for me a pretty good indicator that it works. We also supported it with samples, but we don't have all the results yet. While the green manure is growing, this is some pictures of what you see underground. There is some kind of a microbial activity going on these radishes. I'm not a scientist, I haven't taken samples or anything, but something good is happening there in my opinion. Root development of this fodder radish, we dig some profile pits, and you really can see those things. They go 2 meters deep, and after 2 meters digging I got tired, so I'm pretty sure they still sit a bit deeper. Also on the left picture you can see the nice crumbly structure it leaves. Other thing, nutrient cycling and mining. So at one time we thought, okay, let's see now what sits in this cover crop. So we took on a few spots we took a square meter. We cut all the above ground material. We dig about, we had to dig by hand, so after 30 centimeters we got tired of it. So we had above the underground root material and the above ground material. If you look at it, we managed after drying it, I just dried it, naturally, nothing specifically, but we ended up with about 3 tons underground material, 14 tons above ground material. Then what we did of that dried material, we sent it to a lab for nutrient analysis. And if you look at that figures, NPK, specifically the ones I marked in red, according to my simple farmer calculations, we should have in the 17 tons of plant material, there was about 380 kilograms per hectare of nitrogen, 500 K, and 50 of phosphate. I asked a few people, I said, how much of that material will be available for your next crop? Because we don't remove any of the plants, it stays on the ground and it will decompose. So after speaking to a few people, they say, of your nitrogen, maybe 60% will be available for your next crop, 80% of your potassium and 80% of your potassium and 100% of the phosphate. Then you look on the bottom line, that means you have 230 kilograms nitrogen per hectare, 400 potassium and 50 phosphate. I mean, you should actually be able to grow a crop of potatoes without any fertilizer. Yeah, it's not pure science, but it gives you an indication what cover crops can do for you. The other thing with cover crops, one of our problems is how do you terminate them, because you don't want to, you want to be cost effective and as least soil disturbance as possible. So you think of mowing and disking it in, but then cost a lot of diesel. It's also disturbing your soil again. So what we start doing is using knife rollers. This is just a home-built kind of thing. It works very nice. It breaks the cover crop. It leaves a nice mat on the ground. It's fast, it's cheap. Then the other thing we do is we plant winter cover crop mixes. They are not specifically to reduce nematodes actively, but we hope by increased diversity in the ground that the good ones keep the bad ones in balance. So keep year-round live roots in the soil, create diversity, reduce your weed pressure, avoid erosion, improve soil structure and organic matter, and also the other thing is create winter grazing. So with the winter grazing, apart from the positive effect that grazing has on the soil, it's also a small source of income. But be careful with the mixes, because you don't want anything that increases your plant parasitic nematodes excessively. But we hope with the diversity that the good ones keep the bad ones in balance. You just see a small video here. We started a couple of years ago, the first trial. We start planting early June. And I thought, that night, okay, this was a waste of time. I mean, nothing is going to happen here anymore. But then on the right-hand side, you see how it looked in end of December. So yeah, sometimes you must just try something. And if you don't try, you don't know what you're going to get. Biodiversity in cover crops, this was also one of our first years. We had to mow the cover crop, and I think after about a half an hour we end up with all this, what's the word here? Storks, yeah, in Dutch it's ooievaar, but I don't think that, storks. So from somewhere there must have been something to eat, because within half an hour these birds, they show up. Other thing, the rhizobium active on veg, so you can use your cover crops also to bind nitrogen from the air. You see here on the left-hand side, you see a small yellowish plant, which is the veg. It actually looks very small compared to the mustard and the oats growing next to it. But you can see on the left-hand picture, even that little plant starts making already nitrogen nodules on its roots. And that was also one of the first years. We've done it now a couple of years, and every time veg seems to work quite well, and it's very quickly with its nodulation. Weed suppressing effect of cover crops. This was also one of the first years we planted cereal rye, or it was triticale, I'm not exactly sure anymore. For some reason we forgot to plant one line of the field. This was toward the end of the winter. You can see where the rye is planted, no weeds. Where we missed it, it's full of weeds. But we've also had it that we made some mistakes by planting too late or the wrong variety, and then actually it multiplied weeds. So if you do it right, it's a good tool to suppress weeds, but you can also do it wrong. But only time and experimenting will learn that. Another thing, cover crops, it's experimenting, learn and adapt. This was that same picture that Gerard had in his same field what Gerard had in his presentation. You see the mustard actually, I don't know, looking back, I don't know why I put so much mustard in that mix, because actually the cows, they don't like it. And I remember years ago the mustard became so big that I couldn't destroy it anymore. So I thought, okay, what I'm gonna do now? So we got that knife roller, and the knife roller broke all the stalky mustard into pieces, and the veg and the oats growing under it, they survived. I give it water, and I'm pretty sure in a couple of weeks the oats and the veg has a nice mat again, and we got rid of that stalky material. So you see the top left picture, you see the veg there with the purple flowers after the rolling. It's still connected, so it will still grow again. The same for the oats. And on the right bottom you see all the mustard nicely chopped into pieces. No-till planting using a crimper roller. Another experiment we had last year, we had planted cereal rye there. This was early October. We got the roller out again. We rolled a nice mat of material and we planted maize straight in there. A cheap way to terminate your cover crops, and also it preserves moisture. It keeps your soil structure. I have an idea, it also suppresses weeds. Same field on the other half. We didn't have enough cows, so after half a pivot the cows gave up. It was time to plant. So the one half we rolled, as in the previous picture. The other half we grazed it with cattle, and then after grazing we planted straight into the remaining stubble. At the end of the year, actually both halves of the field had about similar yield, different practices. I mean, I like the rolling, but I also like the cattle because the cattle make some money while the rolling still costs a bit of diesel. Just the mixes we used this year. You see 4 different colors. So we normally try to get a grass in there, which is oats or rye, veg or lupin as nitrogen binders, then the radish and the mustard as deep rooting tap roots, and we had a bit of phacelia in there for pollinator purposes. You see, on average, the cost of the mixes is around 900, 1200 rand a hectare, which for 1 hectare is not that bad. But if you have 600 hectares and you plant half of it, then it's 300,000 rand is quite a bit of money. So something must come back from it. This is the mixes we just described here. That is a couple of actually last week. So on the left hand you have the early April mix, which had oats, veg, lupin, radish, mustard and phacelia. See, the nice thing about the mustard is the flower. So actually you see a local beekeeper, he noticed it. He said, hey, can I put my beehives there in the middle? And if you walk in that crop, it's full of insects. It's amazing. If you walk in a field next to it where nothing is growing, you don't hear anything. If you walk in there, it's full of insects. Right hand side, you see the late April mix. That's oats, rye, veg, radish, and phacelia. Yeah, also looks nice. So, to me, what is better? The more expensive one, the cheaper one? I don't know. I think the most important is do something, do it right, and you will always have a good benefit. This was 2021, just a picture of the different plant species we had in that cover crop. You see some radish, there is some veg, some oats. We had peas in there. So yeah, overall our experiences, I'm confident to say now that with the right species you can actively reduce nematodes via green manure or via the radish one. I'm confident if you do that right, you can get rid of your artificial nematicides. And then via increased diversity in soil microbial life and increased microbial activity, cover crop mixes can reduce control plant parasitic nematode damage. Many other benefits of cover crops that people talked about before. And one thing I try to do is don't spoil the cover crop. We don't give cover crops any fertilizer. I try to minimize the water application. So that way I hope we kind of stress the crop a little bit to make deep roots and also mine nutrients from your soil. I mean, if you give a plant a lot of, again, I'm not a scientist, but if you give it a lot of fast food in the form of fertilizer, it's not gonna do any interaction with your soil life to trade like glucose for microbes. So don't spoil your cover crops. Maybe sometimes if you don't spoil them, it doesn't look so nice because as a farmer, you're used to a crop must be dark green, it must very big, must be very lush and big, but maybe it's better to have a bit of a yellowish, smaller cover crop with a big root system than opposite. In our situation, black oats, triticale, veg and radish work well in our mixes. Not to say that there is no other ones around, but we haven't figured that out. That's our our research keep going. But it's not only easy, there's also a lot of challenges. One of the things, if you talk about cover crops and nematodes, how do you measure nematodes? I mean, what is the threshold of nematodes? You will always find a nematode in your sample. So when do you say I need to act? And then the other thing is sampling is expensive, slow and time consuming. Plus it only gives you a spot indication. How do you quantify then the result of growing a cover crop? I mean, there's a direct financial impact. It has an impact on your nematodes, positive or negative. And how do you measure soil health? Everybody talks about soil health, but how do I measure it? The next thing then, cover crops. How do you establish before our dry winters? Because you can plant in June, but it's very difficult then to get a cover crop growing. So skip a cash crop for a cover crop or a green manure. That's the case what we do with our radish. But I'm willing to do that because the radish is at the moment my only way to get rid of our nematicide to kill root knot nematodes. Other thing to get a cover crop established in time is underseed in maize. We have tried it a bit. We're not that good at it, but that's gonna come this year. Manage cover crops in an effective way. Talked a bit about it, establishment cost, seed cost, irrigation cost, the cost of terminating it. And then what we found last year as well, where we had a lot of cover crops, we found quite a bit of cutworms there when we planted our next crop. Okay, that was all I have to say.
Thank you very much, Peter. Okay, so we've come to the end of the speaking session. I'd like to invite our speakers to join the panel in front, and then I'd also like to invite Rinus Knutzer, who, as you heard, has done a lot of the screening work on nematodes and cover crops, and then Johann Strauss, who was our opening speaker, who also has quite extensive conservation agriculture experience. You guys can, I'm not going to be like Raymond and make you dance, but you can wake up and stretch a bit. And Mika, my co-chair for the session. Does anybody have a question to start off?
So I have a question. One thing that we saw with the cover crops, especially the brassicas, is that maybe it's the seeding density, but we struggle with aphids in several trials that they are a problem when we plant the brassicas.
Simon Hodgson from AGT. When we look at cover cropping as a whole, we look at it as habitat management, whether it's for the predator or whether it's for the pest. So if you've got a single species and you've got a problem with brassicas, we say you've just got aphids in there. Had you had nasturtiums planted next to it, lady beetles would be living there. They'd be helping control that. So if you've got the right mix of underground side of things, so when you're looking at the roots of your cover crop, from the point of view of nematodes, there might be a host plant in there. But you've also got your antagonistic roots in there as well, where the nematodes aren't going to go to. So it's all about biodiversity and habitat management, whether it's above ground from the entomology side of things, where you're creating pest and predator havens, and those in orchards, quite easy to do, get them out of where you're going to be spraying. Fence lines, we're looking at indigenous farmscaping, we're looking at pollen flow, we're looking at nectar flow. So habitat management, stopping mowing in between the macadamia lines. That means the stink bugs live in the grass. They don't live on the tree. If you mow every 6 weeks, they've got nowhere else to live but on the tree. So again, habitat management is the way to look at it. Give them something else to eat or somewhere else to live. Nature's a simple place. You're trying to either eat someone or someone's trying to eat you. If you've got a place to live, you'll stay there. If you've got a place to live and something to eat, you start reproducing no matter what you are, whether you're a nematode or a lady beetle. So and consider habitat management as the overall thing, whether it's above ground or below ground.
Thank you.
Anything online, Danae? Okay. Okay, Sheila?
My question is that, Rinus, and everybody who does the cover crop, I'm sorry, thanks for questioning. It's to all of those doing specific species on different cover crops. I'm finding the terminology very difficult because I use Jeannie's original list, which is, for most of you will know, is quite old. I've used some of Tricky's, and now I've used Rinus as well. Some have poor, good, or excellent host, and there's all words in between. Some use RF factors, and it's very difficult. Yeah, is there no way we can normalize the wording of some sorts? Because now you've got a different rating in the CHIPS articles as well. It's just a request, Rinus.
Yeah, the traditional way is to use the reproduction factor, and everything above 1 is considered a host, but I like the other method more, where you express as a percentage the amount of nematodes in your cover crop when compared to a good host, a known good host. And then normally we then classify it as poor, medium, or good according to that percentage. So anything above 50% would be considered good. Between 30 and 50 would be considered medium, and below 30 would be considered poor host.
And then naught is a non-host.
Yes.
Thank you.
Or it's never naught. You could say below 10 would be a non-host. Below 10% probably. Which is technically not a non-host, but you see what I mean. But I mean, that's not, I'm not saying that's the only system to use, but to me that makes a lot of sense to use that one.
Sorry, I just want to add, if I'm not mistaken, Sheila, on that table, the dash was no data, right, Rinus? Yeah, so just to confirm that. The dash on the table was no data.
Yeah, no, that one I've got. It's just, if you go to Jeannie's work, which was done about 20 years ago, you know, you've got to try and get some, a middle ground or a same system throughout. Okay.
Maybe I can jump in. Sorry, just from thinking about a farmer's perspective, if you have to keep it as simple as possible so that the guy understands. If it becomes too complicated, they won't even look at it.
No, I agree. Thanks, Johan. Can I just ask one question, and then Margaret, you can. The appeal is to Mika. I know what Rinus has now done for the apples and the Pratelinkus and for potatoes South Africa, but the Pratelinkus in the Western Cape hasn't been included on potatoes, Bolivianus and others. And then on the canola and the wheat, we have two completely different, we think, two different species. There could be more. Can't we include all of that, please?
We can. So Rinus and me work together, and most of the work on Pratelinkus is done by Rinus. But we are busy with Bolivianus now, so we can include it. And I just also want to say what Johan says. We have calculated the RF values and the R percentage, but for a CHIPS article, it's much easier to say poor, good, or moderate host, because that's what they understand.
I want to come back to that first question or statement you made on the aphids when you're planting a lot of brassicas in the mix. We found when we started with the cover crops, we got some of the companies, seed companies, to actually propose a cover crop for us. And they would suggest that you put in 1 kilogram of radishes. We actually lowered it with our systems, with our calculator that we've developed, and we're not putting more than 300 grams in a mixture. And it works that way. If you have too much of a certain thing in a mix, you will see problems. And this year we actually had a good example at Langewens. We did a cover crop mix, and I can't remember if I said yesterday we're talking about social distancing in the cover crops, but the oats was too cheap, and we made that a higher factor in terms of the cover crop mix, and this year it became sick. So we learn from our mistakes, but yeah, we try and keep it that all the cover crops is separated. There's enough space between similar ones, so that if there's a disease or a disease problem or a pest coming in, it's not as easy just going from one plant to the next.
So can I just, in the kiwi industry where I've done a bit of work, what we find is that you'll get a grower that keeps his bunkie quite clean, and then the intercrops are grown in the interrow. And we do samples often where we do routine and soil health. So we look at the nematodes in the soil and the roots, and then we look at the soil health and the total nematode community. And within the kiwi roots, you find just root knot. So and high numbers of root knot. And then when you look in the cover crop, you'll find very similar numbers of root knot, but you see that you find a better percentage in terms of total nematode community. So there's a lot of other nematodes in there, and when you look at the percentage, it's not predominantly root knot nematode, it's lots of different species. So does anybody have any experience where what we don't know yet is that growing that cover crop in the interrow, what effect that is going to have on the kiwi yield itself? So, yeah, does anybody have any experience or any thoughts on something like that?
I don't want to talk the whole time, but what we've seen, and I mean, I don't work in orchards and vineyards and stuff like that, but we've had some of the guys talking at our conferences, and all of them is agreeing that since they've started implementing the cover crops in between the vineyards and the orchards, they're actually using less inputs, less water, and the yields has improved. So I don't, for that matter, I think it's going to be, like Hendrik said, place specific and crop specific, and you'll have to figure out over time which cover crop works best and to do that. And a lot of the apple orchards and some of the vineyard guys are actually mowing the cover crop at a certain stage to terminate it, but then they use that cuttings on the bunkie, so they don't need to spend a lot of money bringing in straw or chips and type of that. So we are a firm believer of growing your own cover.
Johan, could I comment on that? Again, getting back to context, Peter was asking about green manure versus cover crops. What is the differentiation between it? And I think it all gets back to what the farmer is trying to achieve. And carbon and nitrogen ratios, when you incorporate that cover crop. If it goes in soft and green, then your bacteria are going to break it down. If it goes in hard and brown, then your fungi are going to work on it. So it's looking at what the farmer is actually trying to achieve. Johan, you were mentioning plant populations. And that is, again, another thing that we look at when we're making mixes. It's not to do with percentages. It's all to do with plant count. So if you put something like Eragostus teff, where there's 4.5 million seeds in a kilo, and you're trying to look at plant populations with that, or plant numbers, it's actually quite difficult to make a mix up like that. So, yeah, it just gets back to what the farmer is trying to achieve and understanding carbon in its three forms, in the liquid and the gaseous, and the liquid carbons being the exudates, your hard carbon compounds being fungi food and soil structure and soil building, whereas your green manure is just recycling of nutrients through your bacteria. And work that was done that we did with Sasri, I think Prabhashni, you were still there. Ruth Rhodes did a lot of work on the amount of nutrients that were coming back from a cover crop, and they were only released over the amount of time that it took for that cover crop to break down. So if you had that 250 or 300 units of nitrogen that you were talking about, if it took 6 months for that to break down, you would get that release over 6 months. It wouldn't be like nitrogen out of a bag. And that again depended completely on soil conditions, on temperature and on moisture and microbe activity, because they keep 2/3 of it for themselves and only give 1/3 back to the soil. So there's quite a lot to it, and that's where it gets, the practical side is what the farmer is trying to achieve. And that's what he has to understand. And we as a seed companies have to be able to explain that to him when we ask him, because that's where we start off, what are you trying to do? Because you can't hit that target unless you know what you're trying to do from the beginning.
Hi everyone, Bernard is my name from Barenbrug, and I'd also like to add Simon to that. Coming from, I do the Eastern Free State, a lot of guys ask the first question when they're either intercropping or integrating cover crops is, what's it going to do to my yield? So, coming from a seed company selling cover crops, I think there's a fine line to tread and not saying, plant this nitrogen fixator and you're going to get an extra 2 tons of maize, which is not always the case. So that's the first question that we usually get. So a nice reply that we get is, don't chase yield, chase a bigger profit. So you can either by cutting those costs, as Simon mentioned now, harvest, let's say, 6 tons of maize and get a bigger profit because you less inputs, less pesticides, than going all out and trying to get 10 tons with 10 tons of input. So your question on the kiwis as well, I think it's not a case of increasing that yield, it's the input cut that you get and the benefits of the soil and the microbes. Yeah.
Prabhashan, can I just add? Also on the kiwis. So I think the one thing we need to remember, now I'm not an expert on the perennial systems, the bunkies, so it's coming probably a bit more from the grain sector, is that we are ultimately trying to build a holistic management system, right? So the cover crops have a very definite role to play. Thinking about how ecology and soil works, I would probably say that the specific rhizosphere is going to select for what's associated with that. So if you've got a bunkie and there's a specific root growing and that is only that root, that will be different from what's growing even a meter or two away. That's, I think, in my mind at least, the logical assumption. And then a second thought I think is also important, and this is coming from the data that I also shared yesterday, is that, and I know it's, and I'm probably stepping on toes, it's difficult to control pests in perennial systems, but it's quite often the specific agricultural practices that prevents the system from building up in terms of becoming more ecologically mature. So we can have cover crops there. It's not to say that we'll have enough predators or omnivores to actually regulate our pests and diseases. So that's just a by thought.
We might not regulate, but we'll at least cut down the use. So, I mean, Peter, you were talking about the cost of the cover crop. If you weigh that up against even reducing your nematicide application by 1 application, not just the monetary cost, but the environmental. So that's what we're all aiming for. Lene, you have a question?
Just a question from the online listeners. In regard with cover crop, how can one balance the equilibrium to reduce the effect of pest damage to the main crop?
What is the question?
With regards to the cover crop, how can one balance the equilibrium to reduce the effect of pest damage to the main crop?
Can I try to answer? So I don't have maybe an answer, but we are trying with the avos, for instance, to try to reduce the pests by having pollinators, by having other plants that attract the stingbug and the false codling moth, so they stay in the cover crops and don't go to the tree. And the same as what you said, you see, they said to me, Fred said to me, they immediately saw the difference in the insect populations. There is a lot of insects and a lot of activity, and they have less problems on the trees. So they could see that. With nematodes, it's more difficult because you cannot see it, but they saw the effect very quickly, and we are trying now. We're going to do a trial with Arcona, and the fruit farm, and we try to prove it scientifically.
Maybe I can add to that. What we've seen at Langewens is that by introducing the cover crops over time, it helps because we don't do anything in the cover crop except plant it and then leave it, that the predators that's hosted there is actually taking out the problems within in the wheat crops and in the canola. So it's totally beneficial in terms of that. I don't know, and it's not like we have more cover crops or equal amount of cover crops in terms of area to our crop. In fact, it's much less cover crop than crop, and we still get the benefit.
Hendrik, would you like to comment on just ecosystem services? When you're talking about regenerative agriculture, we see, or the way that I see it, when you plant a tree on its own, a forest-type tree, whether it's an avocado left to its own devices in Mexico will get to 80 feet tall. A macadamia tree started in a forest in Australia, and we take them and we put them one up 4 meters, 8 meters, 10 meters apart from one another, with no other ecosystems around their roots. What is your comment on sort of biodiversity around the root of that tree from an ecosystem services point of view?
Sure. Okay. So trees, we don't work with trees, but I can take a.
Well, the principles then. You don't have to talk about that tree, but.
All right. Yeah, we just actually touched on that question. So there's, if you bring in diversity and all the other principles, you influence the whole ecosystem, below ground and above ground. So there's so many functions switched on, and all those services are also then coming to the fore. About below ground and above ground, and we said what those services are. So there's a multitude of services functions that are switched on below ground, above ground, and like our approach, like I said, we follow the holistic approach. It's difficult to pinpoint exactly and measure everything. We just measure the bulk of the system in terms of production and efficiency and pests, diseases in a broad way. So we just see that the system is working if you apply it correctly. And there is a risk there. The let's say mixed cover crop systems integrated with livestock is a new thing. And farmers really struggle to get it right. Because they really know, like I said, the current system. Whether it's conventional or no tillage, they know how it works. It's like an oil machine, they know exactly how to implement it. But now suddenly they need to change direction, or they switch around, they need to turn that ship around, and they don't get it right. They don't treat the multi-species cover crop system as a cash crop, for example. They don't prioritize it. They don't know how to do it. They don't know what the mixtures are, etc., etc. And eventually they don't get it right. They don't implement it. So the expected results on ecosystem services and functions are not there. And they're suddenly starting to doubt if this thing is really working. So that is part of my answer. If you get it right, I think you have to have faith in the concept, in ecology, in nature, to really build up, restore the system, because we sit with degraded systems on the one hand. So you have to take time to restore that system. So we talk about phases. The initial phase of 4 to 6 years, depending on your context, and your soils and your climate, takes about 4 to 6 years, and maybe sometimes longer, to restore. And after that, the functions are starting to switch on, and the services are starting to work, to provide you with some free stuff. And in the next phase, let's say the next 4 to 6 years, more things will happen. So you have to give it chance. over time to actually see the results in terms of ecosystem services in various aspects. That's a long answer. Maybe I didn't.
No, that does answer the question. It's, to me, it's like looking at the same set of ingredients. If you were to give Grandma's Christmas cake recipe to Heston Blumenthal, or you give him the same ingredients, he would use them differently. Every farmer uses the same ingredients differently. But what we're seeing is that the recipe, they're not farming to a recipe anymore, but it takes a while to get that new recipe right. And again, it just takes time for the soil to recover. It doesn't recover. It's not like a switch overnight, is what we've seen.
Absolutely, and if I just can summarize that, I think the biggest factor here is the innovation capacity of the farmer. In other words, how much experience and skills and insights he or she has in the tools that he's using. So if they get the innovation capacity of the farmers, if we get it right, this will just be a lot of miracles.
I think that's one of the privileges that we all work with is farmer innovation. Because if you want to change something, you'll get something done. You say to a farmer, that'll never work. And you turn around and walk off. 4 days later, he phones you and says, hey, bud, come and have a look. So, yeah, it's a great privilege to work with the farmers that we do.
It is, and it's also a fine balance and a difficult game to play, working with farmers.
So I actually want to ask a question. So this is for the crowd, for the nematologist. So thinking about, especially the problem of, for example, planting a cover crop in the row and then having a bunkie next to it where the tree is planted. What do we know about the ability of nematodes to be mobile within the soil environment, going out of the environment where they were propagated, where they built their populations, to another rhizosphere that's within a meter or so? I mean, do we think, is that possible? I'm literally asking as an open question. Or do we need to cultivate the same environment on the bunkie itself? I know it's not always possible, but I guess that's the question I think is also relevant to Prabhashini's original question, right?
Yes, we think alike, Gerard. I was wanted to ask the same question, and if we want to reap the benefits of increasing the biodiversity in the rhizosphere of perennial plants, shouldn't we be planting on the bunkies also? But the question, I guess, is how achievable is that from a management point of view, and does it cause other problems?
Maybe I can comment on that in terms of the bunkie. We had a guy talking from Cabo, Oak Valley Farms, and they've started planting medics on their bunkies with the apple trees. And they've sort of developed a really nice system of doing it. Empty water bottle with holes in it, and they put the medic seed in there and they just walk and drift it into the row. And medics, once it's seeded itself and grows, it produces pods and it proliferates itself. And then they do that on the bunkie, and in between the bunkie they plant more perennial grass like rhodes and stuff like that. And it's working amazingly well. They slowly started it, and they're basically changing the whole farm that way.
If I can just use another example, I showed it on the board, on the slideshow, and some of you are very familiar with Bertie Coetzee. He's, like you saw on the pictures I showed of Bertie, he's using a lot of perennials, pecans, export wine, what else? And he's planting cover crops right in between everything, all over the place, and he's integrating livestock in there. So in terms of management of the crops in between his permanent crops, or cover crops in between his permanent, he's doing it with livestock, nothing else. So that's just another example, and it works brilliantly. I'm not sure about the nematodes with Bert.
He's got nematodes, huge problems on his pumpkins, one of his guys, and his garlic. Gerard, you asked about in the system, so what we have, you've got to understand the bunkie isn't always flat, sometimes it's ridged. So planting on there is an issue. So you've got to have a special planter with two, and there are companies with a very wide planter that only plants on the ridge. There is a lot of water on the ridge, but there isn't, especially in the summer months, there isn't water in the between row. The problems that we also have that we had in the apples is weevil. The minute you've got a crop that the weevil can climb into, it needs one leaf, I don't know what, blade, and it's in the tree, and you've got a problem. So that's an issue, particularly on the vines as well. The other thing with table grapes, you've got a canopy, so you don't have sunlight, whereas in wine grapes you don't have. So the other things you've got to, but it's considerations, and they're not insurmountable. The problem that you have in citrus, we have one or two, the citrus has a very low canopy. So to get animals in isn't easy, and there's no sunlight under a citrus tree. You don't prune it like an apple tree, it doesn't lose its leaves. So in the perennial systems, it's a little bit more, it's done, don't get me wrong, but you've got to do some thought. With the trials we did, there were a lot of questions, and we simply couldn't get through all the data that we collected. Matthew collected a lot of insect stuff. Bees were a consideration, but it was done 2-3 years ago, and that's why we're going to have to redo that orchard floor management. The whole system is going to have to be rethought.
Can I comment on the deciduous fruit? No, not deciduous fruit, our fruit, subtropical crops. So they all have leaves throughout the year. So as soon as they're big and they have a big canopy, it's very difficult to get anything underneath the tree. So I see the cover crops, especially in the young trees, and if they change the spacing and they allow more space for cover crops if they really want to go that way. But if you go in an old macadamia orchard or lychee orchard, there's no sunlight anywhere in between. So you can't plant cover crops there. So we need to think, so I think the spacing needs to be changed back to what it was long ago. And then maybe if they prune, because in the macadamias they have other problems. We were talking about it this afternoon, so maybe they can prune. So there are many other things they have to take into consideration when you start using cover crops.
Yeah, so just a concluding thought from my side. So I think, to answer the original question as well, is that we do need to try and find ways of growing crops closer in association with the rhizosphere of the perennial crop itself. But of course there are a number of challenges. But linking up to what was earlier said, I think we see it in the grain industry a lot, is that there's no single recipe that's applied everywhere. The farmers are, in most cases, the innovators. So it's about assisting the farmers, helping them solve the problems, and then taking other people to see the examples, them going back to their original farms, and then coming up with their own solutions. So that whole thing about not one size fits all, I think, is still very valuable or very valid in this context.
I think, Gerard, in an attempt to answer your nematode question simply, it does depend on the species, doesn't it, or the genera. So root knot nematode is not going to go anywhere. It's just going to stay where it is and come out and infect the next root next to it. So that's why, in my mind, having those intercrops in the bunkie, how much of an effect is it going to have on the root knot nematode in the kiwi crop itself? Because it's not really going to go anywhere or be affected by those nematodes in the intercrop.
That's actually a good way for us researchers to keep our jobs. Looking at the next thing that we need to answer, isn't it? I just want to come back to what you said. Yes, that's one way of doing it, changing the row spacing to include cover crops. But it's also a challenge then to go and look somewhere else in the world for what crops we can actually plant underneath there, but will work in our conditions, but actually grows in shade. And a good example of that, it's not necessarily a cover crop, but the Aussies came to South Africa, the Western Cape. They went through the fynbos, identified a natural legume or an indigenous legume, took it back to Australia and developed it into a pasture legume. Lebeckia. And unfortunately, we don't have the seed back yet. And that's the problem with the ARC. I just want to name it out in the open now. But that's an example. We need to sort of get going and go and look elsewhere in the world for possibilities. Or just get our seed companies probably involved in that and say, well, let's go and see what, because most of them has got contacts all around the world, and identify possible things that we could use that can grow underneath the shade.
I couldn't agree with you more. Watch the space when it comes to things that can grow in the shade. But from a seed company's perspective, we've got to create a market before we can start bringing stuff in. There is that pinto peanut that people talk about and they want to get seed for that. There's a small community in Bolivia that produce it as a seed crop. Farmgate, their price, the last time we asked, was $50 US. And we had to bring in 5 tons as a minimum order. Now, for a seed company to lay out $50 a kilo, $50,000 a ton, and bring in 5 tons, that's $250,000. Times that by 18.5, and then hope that you're going to sell it. As the sales guys, if you don't sell it, there's always someone above you that says, well, you ordered the seed, why haven't you sold it? If there's a market for it, we can get these things. But we've got to, where's the chicken? Which is the chicken and which is the egg? Unfortunately, it's the commercial side of things that does hamper that. We are continually looking for new varieties. There is a particular grass that grows in the shade. At the moment in this country, it's only used as a lawn grass. It's 2,500 rand a kilo. You need 10 kilos a hectare. That's 25,000 rand. And as a cover crop, it just doesn't fit. So yeah, we're trying. We're trying.
Can I comment?
Before you, can I just say, there's a question online, and the online person, we're not ignoring you. I just want to finish the train of thought, and then we'll answer your question.
So what I want to add to the cover crops and in our crops is in our trees is we mustn't forget we can use mulches or organic matter or compost also to improve our microbial and rhizosphere. So it does not need, it might be cover crops on the outside, and inside we add organic material. And I just want to make a comment. When you see weeds growing under your tree, then you know you have a nematode problem, because you have less leaves. So it's an indication of nematodes.
Another question online is, says the speaker mentioned species and not varieties when talking cover crops. If nematodes are concerned, it's very important to talk on variety level, isn't it?
So referring to the cover crop specifically, right? Yeah. So basically, I mean, the message was just that if we have white clover, for example, then depending on the variety of the white clover, there's different host plant status linked to that, and that you need to be mindful of that when selecting it as a cover crop.
Yeah, but to do that, you first of all need to know what species of nematode you have, because there's also differences in that. So if that's a concern to you.
Yeah, he also wrote a comment that he says there's a lack of info in South Africa on host status of cover crops. And he stated a website, Best for Soil, that gives some info on nematode relations to species.
So I just want to add on the question, because in my mind, I think one of the bigger challenges we're facing is identifying the actual nematode species. So, sorry, Sheila, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I mean, for diagnostic laboratories, we go to genus level for plant parasites?
It depends.
It depends.
We sometimes do have to do species. For example, in heterodry we have to, and when we're doing cover crop selections, we go to species.
Okay, so that's good news, yeah. So I think that's just, just reaffirming that's really, really necessary.
I think following on from that, Gerard, we've said you need to know the exact cover crop species and cultivar and the exact nematode species. But for a grower, I can imagine that's quite confusing. any thoughts on how we make that more practical and more easily adapted and done in a grower's farm?
So in terms of information being available,
Being available and them needing to know
yeah.
exactly what species they have, because how practical is that on a wide, how practical is that on a wide diagnostic overall level, knowing exactly what nematode species you have, and given the fact that you probably have mixed species within the field?
But the table, so what I think is the way to go is to test as much species as possible, as much cover crops as possible, that we have a table which has poor, moderate or good host, and they can use those. And if it's a poor host, like the 5 we had, and that's been tested on many, on 2 Melodogine mixes on Enterolobi and on 4 Protelenchus species. Those 5 were always poor host. So I feel you can assume it is a poor host. That's what I would look at crops that are poor hosts for all the things you test. But you do need to test the seed that is available and a wide range of nematodes. That would be an easier way, because then you have a better idea. And you only need to, well, you really need to do that where you have nematode problems. Many farmers don't have that big of a problem.
So I just want to add, I think, this is easier said than done, for sure. But ultimately, we need to partner with industry, the seed companies providing cover crop seeds. We need to ultimately generate a database, which is probably, has multiple faces to it. The one is the science behind it, where all the information is generated, the RF values, whatever that might be. But then you also have the other face of that, which is easily accessible by farmers. So, for example, online database, where they can simply check, if it's a specific cultivar crop is a good idea or not. But then also linking that to a diagnostic laboratory if they do have a nematode problem.
Okay, add to that you actually should test, not us, but for diseases too. Because many farmers in the potato industry have a verticillium problem or a rhizoctonia. So it's not only nematodes. We're just one small part. So you do need you do need more information. But with the cover crops, for instance, the cover crops that we tested are also being tested against, I think, verticillium and fusarium for the potato industry. So if we can get more information, then we're further in the battle against or towards a good health.
I just want to come back to cost. If you're done with this conversation, can I? Right? So, because Simon touched on cost, Peter mentioned cost, and Bernard also mentioned cost. It is really an important factor. We found that if the cost per hectare for a multi-species cover crop system in grain crops goes above 500 Rand per hectare, then it's an issue. If we don't add value, like with livestock, with meat production, it becomes a further issue. If we don't manage it well, in other words, you don't get the potential yields, biomass yields from the cover crops, it's another issue. And then if you don't manage to reduce your other costs in terms of ecosystem services brought forward from there, then it becomes a further issue. So if you don't get the whole package right, your cost is going to be too much, and then it makes the whole cover crop integration unviable, economically unviable. So that is an issue, and farmers immediately ask that question when you introduce the idea. You have to bring them, put good data, good examples, and also the principle, concept, the motivation why you need to integrate cover crops. There's existential problems that we have to solve, and this is one of the better tools to use it. And they need to understand that. They need to understand nature. Otherwise, the whole idea of cover crops is going to be difficult to get across to farmers.
Yeah, with the farmers, we work with profitability is the bottom line, and that's why you introduce it. there's going to be pests, there's going to be problems, there's going to be nematodes, there's going to be diseases, but the more you can get your soil working and the more you carry on with those principles, it's a universal concept with an individual application. And each guy has got to work it out for himself. And say profitability is the bottom line. It's not the feel-good aspect of it, of you walking around with a long silver pigtail and a caftan, wafting around your fields going, hey, baby, I'm looking after my soil. It's nothing to do with that. It's bottom line profitability.
That's 100% right, Simon. And also long-term profitability. You have to have a long-term vision, and that's difficult to have any one of us, especially a farmer, because they really need to survive now, this season. To help them to have a long-term vision is also not easy. So what we actually do at the moment is to do financial modeling exercises over a period of 20 or 30 years to see and comparing different systems, the fully integrated conservation agricultural system with cover crops and livestock versus a normal no-till system versus conventional systems. And what we typically see is that right at the beginning, the initial phase, the transformation phase, the CA systems have a dip, what we now famously call the J curve. So there's a dip, a financial dip, not necessarily a production dip, but the financial dip, because you have to have investments in transforming towards regen and conservation agricultural systems in terms of implements, livestock, etc. So that is a financial dip, and you need to recover from that, but it takes time. So you need to have that long-term understanding and vision, where you want to go, how you're going to get there, and also have financial and technical support on or capital and technical support helping you through that J curve, where the no-till and the conventional systems are still going in a fairly straight line, but soon after they start to crash because they're not able to bend the curve through improved ecosystem services and the reduction in costs. And so the cost is just going up and up, and the yields are not stabilized and diversified. So that's why the other systems will crash, and the only one that will lift its head right after the J curve is the fully integrated crop livestock systems, whether it's perennial or annual systems.
Yeah, without that you become a moron, where you just have to put more on and more on and more on and more on to sustain that.
And that will kill you, because the more on is really costly. It's getting increasingly costly. The increase in costs is much faster than the increase in commodity prices. That's what kills farmers. If you're not able to bring down the cost, and the only way to do it, or the best way to do it, is what we are talking about here. Otherwise, you won't survive it.
I think that's very true what Hendrik said, and it's been a challenge for us. We've been trying to, at one stage, had the World Wildlife Fund coming to us and talking about and asking about if we get preferential interest rates, or does the banks have special things for guys that wants to switch. And it isn't in place, but fortunately this year, actually some of the agri-businesses has made the decision to give guys that needs, say, funds to do their farming. A lot of them still use that. They get preferred interest rates if they're doing conservation agriculture. But this is the first year ever that it's happening. And once our financial institutions also gets on board in helping guys, the transition, overall transition in our country might be much quicker than it is currently.
I have a question for the citrus nematologist here. Seeing that the remark was made that the citrus industry is not interested in cover crops.
Thanks, Mika. Yes, if you go through the orchards, you won't see anything green underneath the trees. In between, yes, a lot. So it is a challenge. for the growers. Some of them do want to change over. There are a few organic growers growing citrus commercially. Although, you know, if we come back at the end of the day, it's rand and cents a profit for the guys. And if you compare those yields that they get at this stage with old orchards, you know, the commercial guys still overtake them. So to convince a farmer to go that way is a challenge, first of all. The second thing is, I must say the citrus industry is well balanced in the sense of scientific support. So that helps them to adapt to certain aspects. Like, for instance, many years ago, I would say in our country, the citrus industry was fully following IPM system. And because I only had to spray one product. In the beginning of the season, it was a heavy chemical, and then it was finished. And then, unfortunately, with losing some products, they had to fall back on other products and start using other products. And that messed up the whole IPM system. So we've been actively busy now for the past 5-6 years to try and get back to IPM approach, a fully IPM approach, because we know that's the way to go. We want them to go that way, and luckily we're getting some results now, with scientific results coming in to support that. However, in certain cases there are challenges, you know, things like phytosanitary pests and diseases, and that's a huge challenge for them. You can't export if you have that, and that hamper sometimes some of the approaches that the guys wanted to take. And then a few practical things as well, you know. The approach initially was a citrus tree just needs water and fertilizer, and that's it. You don't need to do anything else. It's not asking much. So there are trees in Citrus Dal, which is minimum 80 years old, and some of them 120 years old. Still being cultivated the same way as day one when they were planted. And that's, you know, we sit with those examples. But why should I change? I'm farming these trees for 100 years. My input costs, yes. The prices are going up, but I'm not using more fertilizer than 10 years ago. It's the same amount that I'm using every year. So you sit with that as well, you know, to convince them to move over. So we've got projects that are registered now to try and see how we can integrate it with as part of the IPM system as well, with regards to the soil health aspects also.
Okay, thank you, MCR. Okay, we've come to 4 o'clock, so it's the end. I must say, having started working with Simon with cover cropping, or green manuring as we would call it in the sugar industry, it's exciting times now, because back then I remember my colleague Ruth Rhodes having to work with an economist to do exactly what you were talking about, Hendrik, prove to the farmers that this green manuring thing that she was trying to get farmers to implement was economically viable, and it was quite hard. But now you can very easily walk along a sugarcane field and see cover crops in pretty much most of the fields. So it's an exciting time, and thank you for everybody for giving up their time and listening, and I think we've all learned a lot, and let's keep working on it. It's tea time now, and for the panelists, if you want to join us, we have a poster session afterwards, so you're welcome to join us for tea, stay for the poster session, and then have dinner with us.